The envelope method, visual budget control. Money has a strange habit of disappearing. You get paid, you feel secure for a moment, and then 2 weeks later, you are staring at your account, wondering where it all went. If that sounds familiar, you are not bad with money. You are simply using an invisible system to manage something that was never meant to be invisible. Today, we are going to talk about one of the world's simplest and the most psychologically powerful budgeting tools ever created, the envelope method. It sounds almost too basic to work. Physical envelopes, cash, categories, yet this method has helped millions of people around the world break the cycle of overspending without apps, without spreadsheets, and without willpower battles. Whether you are a student managing your first allowance, a parent running a household, or a business owner trying to control cost, this episode is for you. Whatever you are listening from on your walk, during a commute, or while doing course, settle in. By the end of this episode, you will understand not just how the envelope method works, but why your brain responds to it so powerfully. Let's begin. Point number one, money becomes real when you can touch it. The single biggest reason the envelope method works is something behavioral economics called the pain of paying. When you swipe your card or tap your phone, your brain barely registers the transaction. It feels abstract, almost like a video game. But when you hand over physical cash, your brain processes it as a genuine loss, and that discomfort makes you pause before spending. This is not a personality flaw, it is basic neuroscience. Studies on consumer behavior have consistently shown that people spend significantly more when paying digitally compared to paying with cash, simply because digital money feels less real. The envelope method exploits this psychological truth in your favor. By converting your budget into physical, touchable cash divided across labeled envelopes, you reintroduce that natural friction your brain needs to make thoughtful decisions. For example, imagine two people with the same grocery budget of $200 a month. One uses a debit card, swiping without much thought each visit. The other withdraws $200 in cash, places it in an envelope labeled groceries, and pays only from the stack. The second person will almost always spend less because every bill leaving that envelope feels like a visible physical sacrifice. This single principle, making money tangible, is the foundation on which every other benefit of this method is built. Next, point number two, categories create boundaries your brain understands. Humans are naturally wired to think in categories, not in abstract totals. Telling yourself, I have $3,000 this month, is far less useful than telling yourself, I have 400 for food, 200 for transport, and 100 for entertainment. The brain struggles to manage one large, undefined pool of money because there is no natural stopping point. Nothing tells you when you are crossed a line. But when money is divided into clearly labeled categories, each envelope becomes its own miniature budget with its own visible boundary. This eliminates the mental gymnastics of trying to remember how much you probably have left for eating out after already covering rent, fuel, and bills. Consider a small business owner managing a shop. Instead of keeping all revenue in one account and guessing how much can be spent on supplies, marketing, and wages, they divide funds into separate envelopes or accounts for each purpose. When the marketing envelope is empty, they know instantly to stop spending on ads without needing to check complex financial statements. This same logic applies to a household. A family that separates money into rent, groceries, fuel, and fun envelopes always knows exactly where they stand in each area of life, rather than discovering too late that overspending in one category quietly drained funds meant for another. Next, point number three, it forces you to plan before you spend. One of the quite failures of modern budgeting apps is that they are often reactive. They tell you what you already spent after the money is gone. The envelope method flips this completely by forcing proactive planning. Before the month even begins, you must decide how much goes into each envelope, which means you are making conscious decisions about your priorities in advance. Rather than reacting emotionally in the moment of purchase. This shift from reactive to proactive thinking is one of the most powerful mental upgrades a person can make with their finances. When you sit down at the start of the month and divide your income into rent, food, transport, savings, and leisure, you are essentially having conversation with your future self about what truly matters. Let's say example, a college student receiving a monthly allowance might realize while filling envelopes that entertainment was consuming nearly a quarter of their money, leaving very little for savings. Simply seeing this gap during the planning stage before spending happens often triggers an immediate correction. This is very different from checking a bank statement after the fact and feeling regret. Planning ahead through envelopes turns budgeting from a monthly autospy into monthly strategy session, which is far more empowering position to operate from. Next, point number 4. Running out of cash becomes a natural stop sign. Perhaps the most practical benefit of the envelope method is what happens when an envelope is empty. Spending simply stops because there is no more physical money to give. This is fundamentally different from a credit card, which allows you to keep spending even when you have already exceeded what you can afford, quietly building debt in the background. With envelopes, the system enforces discipline automatically without requiring constant self control or tracking. You don't need to calculate your remaining balance in your head while standing at a checkout counter. The envelope tells you instantly because it is either full, partially full, or empty. Picture someone who struggles with impulse buying at clothing stores. In the past, a credit card allowed them to keep purchasing even after their intended budget was exceeded, leading to statements filled with regret. Now, with a clothing envelope containing a fixed $100 for the 1 month, once that cash is gone, the shopping trip effectively ends, regardless of how tempting the next item looks. This odd stop removes the exhausting mental negotiation of just this one once because the decision has already been made in advance by the amount placed in the envelope. In this way, the method protects you from your own future impulses using nothing more than a physical limit. Next to point number 5, it reveals your true spending patterns. Many people genuinely do not know where their money goes each month, not because they are careless, but because spending happens in dozens of small disconnected transactions that never get reviewed together. The envelope method creates an unavoidable amount of clarity at the end of each month. When you look at each envelope and you see exactly how much survived and how much vanished, an empty dining out envelope by the 15th of the month is a piece of information no bank statement delivers with the same emotional impact. This visual feedback loop teaches you about your own habits faster than any financial course could because the lesson is personal and immediate. For instance, someone might believe they spend a little on coffee and snacks throughout the week, only to discover their miscellaneous envelope is completely drained by day 10, revealing a pattern they had never consciously noticed. This kind of discovery is far more convincing than being told a general statistic about small purchases adding up. Once a person sees with their own eyes that a specific category consistently runs out early, they are naturally motivated to either increase that budget intentionally or curb the underlying habit. The envelope system, in this sense, becomes a mirror that reflects true financial behavior back to the individual, month after month. Next, point number 6, flexibility exists within structure. The common misconception is that envelope method is rigid and punishing, but in truth, it offers a very human kind of flexibility, the freedom to reallocate money consciously. If the entertainment envelope runs low, but the transport envelope still has a extra cash because you walked instead of taking a cab, you can choose to move money between envelopes. The key difference from undisciplined spending is that this transfer is a deliberate, visible decision, not an accidental step. You are not spending blindly. You are making a trade off you can see and feel. This turns budgeting into an ongoing series of small, mindful choices rather than strict set of unbreakable rules. Consider a family planning a small celebration mid-month. Instead of pulling from a credit card and creating unplanned debt, they might decide to move $50 from their groceries envelope since they planned simpler meals that week into their celebration envelope. This is a conscious state they fully understand, made in real time, with a real awareness of the consequences. Slightly simpler groceries in exchange for a meaningful celebration. This flexibility is what makes the envelope method sustainable long term because life is never perfectly predictable, and a system that cannot bend even slightly will eventually break under the pressure of real life. Next, point number 7, it builds emotional discipline, not just financial discipline. Overspending is rarely a math problem. It is almost always an emotional one. Stress, boredom, celebration, and even sadness can trigger spending that has nothing to do with actual need. The envelope method indirectly builds emotional discipline because the physical act of opening an envelope and watching cash leave your hand creates a brief but powerful pause, a moment where emotion eats consequence in a very tangible way. This pause is often enough to interrupt an impulsive decision before it becomes a regretted purchase. Over time, repeatedly experiencing this pause trains the brain to associate spending with a moment of reflection rather than instant emotional relief. For example, someone who tends to shop when feeling anxious might find themselves reaching for their shopping envelope during a stressful week, only to notice in that physical moment of counting bills a flicker of hesitation that didn't exist with your card. That tiny hesitation is the seed of self-awareness. Over several months of this repeated fiction, many people report becoming naturally more thoughtful even in situations where they are not using envelopes at all because the underlying habit of watching before spending has been reinforced. In this way, the envelope method quickly trains emotional regulation alongside financial control. Next, point number 8, works across cultures, incomes, and eras. One of the most remarkable qualities of the envelope method is its universality. It does not require a bank account, smartphone, internet access, or financial literacy. A farmer in a rural village, a factory worker in a growing city, and a corporate employee in a wealthy nation can all use the exact same method, adjusted only by the numbers written on the envelope, not the underlying logic. This is why the method existed in various forms for generation long before formal budgeting apps ever appeared, and it continues to be taught by financial educators worldwide today. Its simplicity is precisely its strength, because complexity is often what causes people to abandon financial systems altogether. Consider two very different households, one in low-income neighborhood carefully dividing a weekly wage into envelopes for rent, food, and transport, and another high-income household using digital envelope-style sub-accounts to manage a much larger salary across investments, luxury spending, and giving. Despite the vast difference in numbers, the psychological mechanism protecting both households from overspending is identical. This universality is a powerful reminder that good financial principles are not about how much money you have, but about how clearly you structure the money you do have. Next, point number 9, digital versions preserve the psychology if used correctly. In today's world, many people cannot or do not want to carry physical cash, and thankfully, the envelope method has evolved into digital form through the budgeting apps that create virtual envelopes or sub-accounts for each spending category. The critical lesson here is that the tool can change, but the principle must remain the same. Money must be visually and functionally separated into limited, dedicated pools before it is spent. A digital envelope only works if it increases the same psychological experience as cash. A clear number, a visible depletion, and a genuine stopping point when funds run out. Simply tracking spending after the fact in an app without a pre-allocating limits does not deliver the same behavioral benefit because it removes the proactive planning and the hard stop that make the original method so effective. For example, someone using a banking app with separate pots or jars for bills, groceries, and savings, where each pot has a fixed amount transferred at the start of the month, is still practicing true envelope budgeting just without physical paper. In contrast, someone using a single account and only glancing at a spending summary at a month's end is missing the core psychological mechanism entirely. The lesson is clear. Adapt the format to your lifestyle, whether cash based or digital, but never abandon the underlying principle of pre-divided, visible, limited categories. Next, point number 10, consistency turns a technique into a lifelong habit. The envelope method, like any financial tool, only works if it is practiced consistently rather than treated as a temporary fix during a difficult month. The real transformation happens after several months of repetition, when dividing money into categories stops feeling like an exercise and becomes an automatic, almost unconscious habit, similar to brushing your teeth or walking your front door. At this stage, people often report that even without activity using envelopes, they instinctively think in categories and naturally hesitate before overspending in any single area of life. This is the ultimate goal of any budgeting system, not permanent dependence on the tool itself, but the internal transformation it creates within the user over time. Consider someone who used physical envelopes diligently for an entire year while paying off debt. Even after becoming debt free and switching to fully digital banking, they continue to mentally divide every paycheck into categories before spending a single dollar, because the habit had become part of how they naturally thought about money. This is the quite powerful outcome of consistency. The envelope method eventually disappears as a visible tool and reappears as an invisible permanent mindset. That mindset, more than any single envelope or dollar amount, is the true or the lasting reward of this method. Finally, so there you have it. 10 reasons why a method as simple as dividing cash into labeled envelopes remains one of the most effective ways to control spending. Even in our digital age, what makes this approach powerful is not complexity, but psychology. The way it makes money tangible, creates natural boundaries, and turns planning into a habit rather than an afterthought. Whether you choose physical envelopes, digital subaccounts, or a hybrid of both, the core lesson remains the same. Money that is divided with intention is money that is protected from impulse. If this episode gave you a new way to think about your spending, consider trying it for just 1 month. Pick 3 or 4 categories, set clear limits, and watch how differently you spend when you see and feel exactly where your money is going. Thank you for spending this time with us today. Keep building, keep learning, and we will see you in the next episode. Thank you.